Well, should we bring him in?
Yeah,
he has a friend with him who's I know.
Absolutely.
Hey, Roland, can we bring the good doctor in?
Yeah.
What, he's traveling with another ghoul?
He has another coroner friend with him. I don't know if they like to be called ghouls.
Yes, perhaps not.
It's not the official. Dr.
I know that guy.
There you go.
Hey, I know
Hello,
you.
sir.
Hey, I know this.
You want to sit there?
Peter Dean is the coroner in London.
Yeah, you got some.
Hello, sir.
You got some terrific eyebrows there, sir.
Hey, huh?
Sunburn.
Easy, doctor.
Sunburn, yeah.
Sure.
Serious American
Show him
sunburn.
how you do things here on hate.
Oh, satellite, yeah.
He doesn't understand. They don't do that in England. They don't.
No?
We have
Satellite.
a lot of terrestrial stuff, a certain amount of satellite, but not satellite radios.
Yeah.
This is like a...
Oh, yeah, they don't have it over
Way
there.
ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
You get to curse on this this medium.
Well, you know.
I'm
is
here
all
to
about.
learn.
Yeah, put the headphones on there
okay.
so you can hear
There you go.
everybody.
We get the headphones and
Yeah.
Dr. Baden, make yourself comfortable.
Baden.
Thank you.
Dr. Baden.
Yes.
We've done
Yes.
about 12 HBO documentaries, one a year.
Oh, really?
12? I thought it was 5. Wow, shows you
Yeah,
how
well,
I'm
that's
a little-
okay. You've been sleeping a little bit.
I've been very
But,
Yeah, we were talking earlier how we enjoy the show. The show Autopsy was great. Watching your specials, and you're so comfortable with the subject, and it's
Well, that's what I do.
I know,
You
the thing is,
You're comfortable sitting here, and I'm nervous.
yeah, but you know something, your line of work is a little more disturbing.
It depends
than
how
this.
you look at it.
Yeah.
When I started out as an internist at Bellevue Hospital, an intern resident. Seeing people die and not being able to do anything to help, that's really disturbing. Once they're dead, then they're out of pain and suffering. It isn't.
What's the worst could happen? You get a pulse.
We've had that happen a few times.
Really?
Guy goes to the morgue and sits up and says, "What am I doing here?" And,
Is that real?
Wow.
Yeah, it does happen. It happens because sometimes the especially in older people, the pulse becomes so faint and the breathing becomes so faint that it's easily overlooked.
Oh.
And after a few hours, they may come up. We've had a number of these in New York, but they're all over in the States.
What you need that male nurse for, that angel of death guy, you know, with the pillow. What's with those guys, Dr. Baden? Jesus.
That's the kind that we can't tell. That's the pillow is.
Yeah, that seems to be like a really. Let's take that. Let's run with that for a minute. The old pillow over the nose thing when you suffocate somebody. How do you determine that somebody was murdered or if they just died in their sleep?
On the radio?
Oh, we're on.
We're on.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, make sure you say fuck a lot.
Hey,
Well,
watch your language,
The
Opie.
thing about that is that we don't like to give primers on how to kill people.
Well, I wouldn't, either.
But I must say that suffocation is the hardest diagnosis for a medical examiner to make.
Is it?
Because whereas shootings and stabbings and baseball bat injuries leave something to see at autopsy, if somebody suffocated, when the suffocating device, the hands or the pillow taken off, everything pops back to normal.
Yeah.
So those are the hardest. It was easier when we had feather pillows because the feather pillows would often break and they'd inhale the feathers.
Oh, so you
And
could
so
see
when I first started out, we had a few people who had inhaled feathers in their windpipe and lungs, and we could say, hey, there's something wrong with this.
He's been suffocating.
Yeah, yeah.
Go ahead, Jim.
Attacked and murdered by a chicken or something.
That's right.
Well, how do they? Wait, don't they tell kids? Don't the teeth leave a print in the back of your lip?
Oh.
So you're pretty good at this. Sometimes it depends on the amount of force used, or if something is pushed in the mouth, like if a sock or something is pushed into the mouth to assist in the suffocation, it can leave injuries on the tongue and the inside. But if it's one of the things that happens with the sudden infant death cases with babies who don't struggle very much, they can get wrapped up in bedding, or they can get wrapped up in plastic. In the old days, they used plastic to prevent injuring the mattress when a kid urinates.
That's great.
They can get wrapped up. It can cause death and not leave any signs. So those are things that we look at very carefully.
I just was watching. I like watching the A&E crime shows, and they had a case where a man he was suspected of killing his infant, and they had it as SIDS. And a few years prior, he had another baby with another woman who died of SIDS. And it turned out that they convicted him of murder.
Right. Well, the thing there is, and the HBO specials you're talking about, we've had a couple of those where the way one often identifies suffocation of babies is it happens again and again.
Right.
And that alerts the police and the investigators that this isn't just by chance. So the ones that get caught are the ones who usually have more than one.
What's the toughest one you've ever worked on where you had to prove that somebody was murdered and there really wasn't much evidence, but you pulled it out?
Well, part of the problem is when we investigate a case as medical examiners, we're there not just to do something in prosecution. We're there to do something for either side. So our investigation was a crime committed. Now, some of the tough ones are when we have a crime, the police think it's a crime, and we don't find any evidence of a crime. We say so. But I think the toughest one was a serial murder in Massachusetts, where a nurse was thought to possibly be poisoning veterans by injecting various potassium into the intravenous lines. Oh. This is about 5 or 8 years ago.
I hear that's very hard to detect.
And yes, it is detected because as soon as we die, the potassium starts getting screwed up in the body. The red cells break and all that. And initially, there'd been some identification by the toxicologist, but his information on it was wrong. He had the wrong decimal point, and the judge wouldn't let him testify. So we were able to make the identification in court, not by toxicology, but by the electrocardiogram, which with potassium shows certain abnormalities. That is, when the codes were called, they did an EKG, and we went back and were able to find some of the EKGs and able to establish the toxicology, not by chemical analysis, but by clinical symptoms and electrocardiogram. That's kind of tough.
So the person get convicted?
Yes, a female nurse convicted, and it was in Massachusetts, which is a non-death penalty state. But this was federal because it was in the federal VA hospital.
Oh, right.
So I had to then testify at a sentencing hearing, and the federal prosecutors were going for the death penalty in Massachusetts. And the jury voted 11-1 for capital punishment, but because one person held out, she's in jail someplace in Texas.
Got to be unanimous.
And she's been in the news every now and then because she has had affairs with various prominent female murderers.
Oh, really?
Wow. In
Loving the
jail.
old prison.
In jail, in prison.
All right, so she's a good egg.
Yeah.
She's a fucking goer in jail. How do you not like that? So you've been involved with some really high-profile cases, too. I didn't even realize, it said here Sid Vicious's death.
Yeah, well, that was when I was the chief medical examiner in New York City, and Sid Vicious had been arrested for stabbing Nancy Spungett at the Chelsea Hotel, a wonderful hotel in West 23rd Street that a lot of famous writers had lived in. And he was in jail for stabbing Nancy Spungett, and he got bail out, and he came out, and within a few days he was dead from a drug overdose. And when I went down there, his mom was there collecting his things down in Greenwich Village someplace, and he had a very high level of heroin because he had lost his tolerance while he was in jail. So he came out and shot up the same stuff.
Oh, wow.
And he died because he didn't wait to gradually develop the tolerance.
Wow, that'll happen?
Yeah, and that's why often, it's amazing it doesn't happen more often because addicts, there's no FDA approval for what's in the little packets. And when in the old days, when I started out in the 60s, 70s, when there was sort of organized crime distribution of heroin, we'd analyze the packets, and they had pretty much the same amount of heroin in them. Then as more different groups came into it, and there was disorganized distribution of heroin, the amounts of heroin in a packet varied a great deal, and if a kid instead of taking the usual packets, took one from a different supplier and had more heroin, he could die from an overdose. So the overdoses increased.
Wow. Yeah, you were you were head of
The medical examiner's
office in New York City. And what year was that? Because it was...
Oh, I was in the Sid Vicious about 1978, 79.
Yeah. So
I was in the office for about 25 years.
Geez, so you probably saw a lot coming through there, huh?
Oh, yes, we had. We were up to 2,000 homicides a year then.
Yeah.
Now it's down to about 500 or so.
Yeah, 2,000 a year during the time you were in
the
there.
Koch years, or is that...
That was, yeah. That was
Koch and
during the Koch
Dinkins.
years, you're
Sure.
right.
And that, wow, that's a lot of work.
Yeah, we got a lot more homicides than in England. In England, where they used to not have guns, there was a lot less murders. But there's a lot more stabbings, I think.
A lot more, yeah, they're still angry. They're just using different tools.
That's right. But usually, see, the thing is, when you stab somebody, usually you don't kill them. A gunshot wound to the head is pretty devastating, or to the chest. But stabbing, person's more likely to survive.
Unless it's one of those multiple, just, over and over again.
Anger.
Well, like, OJ. We'll take that whole thing.
Well, see, there you are again. OJ, the jury said he was not guilty.
Of course they did.
And you go along, you probably even think Lizzie Borden was guilty.
They made up a little rhyme about her. Yeah. It has to be. Has to be true.
It's PR. Even back then, it was about 1890s. Lizzie Borden took an axe, gave her
mother 40 whacks.
When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41.
41, yeah.
Now, the hip hop culture of that day
that was still
lives with us, and it obscures the fact that she was found not guilty.
That was some gangster rap back then. Wow,
in England.
Now, what do you?
No, that was that was in Massachusetts.
Massachusetts, yeah.
Fall River.
What the OJ thing? Now, obviously, I detect a tad bit of sarcasm. What? And I know it's ancient history at this point, but what do you think went wrong with that case? I mean, they had him.
Well, I think partly in the United States, the government has to prove its case, and I think there's general agreement. Even the people who think that OJ, like Bugliosi, who wrote a big thing about it, and others who were violently thought that OJ had done it, they all agreed that the prosecution failed to prove its case. I think the criticism in large measure is the prosecution didn't present its case effectively.
You testified I was surprised because I was a fan. I was surprised when you testified for the defense. It actually made me kind of question, like, well, what kind of evidence must they have then? Because they got Dr. Baden testifying. What was the basis of them asking you to testify?
Well, the basis, there were two bases, which, and one has to be careful in these cases. We don't testify. I don't testify as to guilt or innocence.
Right.
I testify as to certain points. And with every medical examiner testifies in a case, like an OJ, there might have been 50 or 60 other people testifying who may have had more impact on the jury. But one of the things was that the medical examiner testified from the stab wound of the young man Goldman's body that the person who did the stabbing was right-handed, about 6 feet tall, and stabbed him from the front. And I testified, you can't tell that from an unwitnessed stabbing. It could have been a midget stabbing him who was left-handed, stabbing him from the back.
Yeah, I always thought that was a little odd on TV shows, especially where they're like, obviously he was right-handed.
Right.
And you're like, well,
he voted Democrat. Look at the stab wound.
You can't, unless somebody sees the positions they're in, facing each other or something. There's no hint to whether it's left-handed or right-handed, and that was one of the issues that I testified. It's that they added in a lot of bad information with the good information. They had a lot of good information. I think the DNA evidence was really good, except that it was presented wonderful for a physician. I loved their 5 days of testimony on DNA. But somebody who just graduated from high school isn't going to understand what they said. That's one of the things that we're very concerned about in testimony is how does the jury understand what we're saying. It's like you must have guessed who'll come in and they'll say wonderful things in PhD terms that are true, but nobody understands it.
Right.
And I think that's partly what happened in OJ also.
So there's like a real, there's a misconception. Testifying for the defense just means that they called you to talk about a certain piece of medical evidence, but it does get presented like, oh, Dr. Baden must have thought he was innocent because he was... Okay.
I agree. I'm glad you said that. That doesn't at all mean that when I testify for the prosecution, though, because 90% of the time I work now with the New York State Police. I worked in New York City for 25 years. We'd be called by the prosecutor to testify.
Sure.
I would hope that they got the right guy, but the thing about it would be that the testimony I give theoretically could be useful for either side, and we have to be fair. And now, half the time when I'm asked to testify in private, I'll give an opinion, and I won't be called to testify because my opinion doesn't agree with the theory of the defense attorneys. So when I get to testify, it's because the lawyers think I'll be helpful, but at the same time, you don't know. The public doesn't know all the times we don't testify
Because your opinion
we
is gonna
disagree.
Wow, see, I'm glad. I was curious. I figured there was a reason for it, but it's like you don't realize, like, oh, they would call different guys just to talk about one piece of the evidence.
Yeah.
And look, if the prosecution is saying you can tell by stab wounds stuff about a guy you can't tell.
That's right.
You know, all right, well, they got to bring in somebody to counter that.
What creeps you out? Like, does any of this death stuff creep you out ever?
Yeah, what would creep me out when I started and still is young kids and children who are innocents. So much of what we do as medical examiners, the victim is often involved in the death. You know, the alcoholic who gets in a fight, the drug addict who gets killed by a pusher, or in a family affair, the spouse who's been in a terrible marriage and fighting and all that for years, and one kills the other. It's all sad, but there's an understanding of that. When a parent or a stranger kills a kid who's perfectly innocent, especially when I had kids the same age, it really was creepy. Even this Kaylee case, that's Kaylee Anthony that's going on now in Florida.
Is this the guy who killed the little brother? And it's just, I'm not sure.
There's the mom.
There's the mom.
Who's in jail
okay.
and refused to say what happened to her.
Yeah, the kid is missing.
3-year-old kid.
Yep.
That's really creepy because he has an innocent kid, and obviously there are things going on that are upsetting.
Can you think of one case, though, that was the most? Like, I guess it's hard when you look at, say, 10 different stranger children. You can't pick which one. But is there one that stands out for you that was just the most enraging or the most upsetting?
Well, the only one I ever cried at, I actually cried, when I was asked to be in head of
Pussy.
Pardon
Kidding.
Okay. No. It's sensitive.
I understand. I had to.
The only one that I really tears came out was when I examined the John F. Kennedy autopsy for the Select Committee on Assassinations that was established back in 1978-79 to review the deaths of John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King. And I looked at that autopsy and the photographs, and it was such a terrible kind of autopsy and photographs where there wasn't a proper cleaning of the body and the proper attention paid, to show our president who had been killed and to show what I would consider not proper respect for the remains. Really upset me. Apart from the fact that they got the entrance and the exit and the trajectory wrong, in our president, when that autopsy was done by hospital pathologists who never had any experience doing gunshot wounds. Jeez. And one of the problems when I started out in the 60s, 80%, 85% of murders in New York City were solved. Now, counterintuitively, it's down to about 49% solved with all the new DNA and all the new stuff. And that's around the country. And part of the problem from around the country that the solve rate for murders has gone down so much is because the people doing the autopsies are hospital pathologists, largely, who do not know about gunshot wounds and stab wounds, as with President Kennedy.
Wow.
And that's still the situation in this country. They're good pathologists to look into cancer and heart disease and natural disease that kill 92% of people. But the 8% of people, accident, suicide, homicide, that medical examiners deal with, forensic pathologists, they're probably less than 400 pathologists in the country compared to 800,000 doctors. And most of the murders today, 50 murders in the United States today, will be done by, the autopsy will be done by pathologists who are not qualified to do
50
those.
murders or 50%?
50 murders.
50 murders?
About 50 murders a day in the United States.
Okay.
So, I'm sorry. And hospital pathologists do the autopsies who are not trained in forensics. And that's one of the reasons that even with the better forensics we have, the people doing the autopsies aren't, as with John F. Kennedy.
Was he shot from the front or the back, do you think?
He was shot twice and only twice from the back. And one missed. The first one misses. Second one hits him in the back and goes into John F. Kennedy. Governor Connolly says he hears a shot and he starts turning around. That shot he thinks hit the president, but it missed. It hit the curb. When the second shot comes in, he's partially turned to look at what happened, and that's why that gunshot wound is thought to be curves around, which it doesn't.
He's turned
because
around
he's
a little
turned
bit.
and it's a straight line through his back into his left thigh.
And they're assuming he's sitting there straight, but he's
That's
not.
right, which he wasn't. And then the third, and he might have survived that one, but the third shot is the one that kills him. That's in the line of fire with. Movie about that.
Also about these, I know the House Select Commission on Assassination in '78. They actually said that I guess through acoustics, they did acoustic tests. They thought that there might have been a fourth bullet, and they said that they think there definitely was, but now they're going back on that.
That's a very good question, and the reason it's a good question goes back. Our forensic pathology panel concluded 2 and only 2 shots from behind, from where Oswald was. But there are other experts, just like in every trial, just like with O.J. And the experts in the acoustical trial said there was a 4th shot, which there's no evidence from the autopsy. So they concluded that it was a conspiracy because the 4th shot would have been too close to the 3rd shot to have to reload. It was like a second apart.
Wasn't it they said it was a policeman's motorcycle audio that had been left on, and but then they said later maybe it was the wrong mic that they had thought. So what they were hearing was actually a noise from somewhere else and not part of the assassination.
Yeah, that's right. And the policeman whose car it was, whose motorcycle was with the mic that presumably was open, that they heard the 4th shot on, he denied that it was his radio that was on. He just has consistently denied it. And I think that the noise, I've listened to that, just a lot of static.
Yeah.
You guys would probably be.
Yeah, I've heard it.
Be good. There was a nice little professor from Queens College who said it was a 4th shot, but there's no other evidence. No evidence in the body, no evidence in
So you have no doubt Oswald did this, huh?
That's correct. No question. His fingerprint, his handprint is on the weapon. He purchased the weapon under a false name. No, and the trajectory lines up to where if you assume that Connolly is sitting, turning slightly to look at, of course, he was a hunter and he heard the first shot and he recognized it as a shot, which didn't hit anybody except you can see on one of the Zapruder films where it struck the curb. And then the second shot hits the president and Connolly.
And there was also JFK, too. It's funny. It was on a seat that was raised a little bit, and it was more towards the middle, where all the old diagrams, like they showed Connolly facing forward, Kennedy. But Kennedy was to Connolly's left, I believe, a little bit, so the trajectory does line up a little bit better.
Yeah.
And he was. They said that he was kind of slumped down, which is why the suit jacket was raised. All these things that the conspiracy nuts.
The thing about it is that the Connolly was on a jump seat in front. So it was lower down and to the a little bit to the left of Kennedy, sitting behind him. Jumped, and that if you take it all into account, it's clear, and we concluded almost unanimously that that bullet, that the second bullet that Oswald shot, struck Kennedy in the back, went through his chest. Went through his neck, and into Connolly's chest and into his thigh.
Wow.
That's the so-called magic bullet.
The whole autopsy thing, where it was so dirty, and it seemed like it wasn't. Like, was that just business as usual back then, or?
Yes, that was business as
Wow.
usual. Except it was the one thing, and this is one of the things that when hospital pathologists do work and do autopsy, and people die of cancer and heart disease, the people they've operated upon, they'll have the chairman of the surgery department and the residents and interns there to learn from it and to give information about how what went wrong in the operation, for example. Here, when the president is killed, you can't. When medical examiners do autopsies, you can't have interested people in the autopsy room. The autopsy room belongs to the pathologist in charge of doing the autopsy. And what was happening in the Kennedy autopsy is that there were admirals and cabinet members in the autopsy room who shouldn't have been there, and giving him orders. And we asked him. I interviewed this Dr. Humes, who in Washington. We interviewed him. I said, "Had you ever done an autopsy on a gunshot victim before?" "No." "Did you tell this to the people who asked you to do the autopsy? You should get a medical examiner, not a hospital pathologist." And he said, "Look, when all these generals and admirals are there, we don't say anything."
Wow.
They tell us to do something, we do it.
Wasn't he military too, Doctor? Wasn't he military and kind of more subject to orders than somebody else would have
Yes,
been?
he was a commander.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, and he was stationed at the hospital, and he just so happened, they took the body illegally from Dallas, where they had an excellent forensic pathologist who'd done hundreds of gunshot wound and rifle wound autopsies, and brought it up to illegally because it was at that time a state crime, to Washington, D.C., where the doctors who did the autopsy had no experience doing the gunshot wound cases.
Why'd they do that? Did they ever say why they did that?
They say they did it because the Secret Service felt that this might be a conspiracy and they'll be after Jackie Kennedy. They're going to shoot other people. We had to get and there was a confrontation. The medical examiner in Dallas stood at the emergency room door in the hospital and said, "You can't take the body out of here. This is a state of Texas, Dallas County case. It's illegal to move the body." And the Secret Service there, and they had the Dallas police in the emergency room, had a brief confrontation, and there was a concern of some people that they were going to draw guns and start shooting. But even though there was this objection, the decision was made to overrule the medical examiner in Dallas and to move the body down to Washington, which was a big mistake. And I think a lot of there'd always be questions, but a lot of the questions that have risen about autopsy misfindings, because the autopsy report has a lot of incorrect information, would have been avoided if a proper forensic pathologist had done the autopsy, as was present in Dallas.